I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's current events. Last week we didn't have one, mainly because I was at the Advancing Improvement in Education Conference. Like many of you, when you're away, things just get kind of crazy, still trying to catch up on things. But it was a nice conference. I like Austin anyway, but and I'll tell you, this thing is actually pretty well funded. I got to speak at it, and when I got to speak at it, it's one of the few conferences that'll pay my hotel and registration, and so it saves me quite a bit of money when I go down there because of that. They tend to feed you just about every meal, so I'm not exactly sure who is funding this thing, but it certainly is getting a lot of funding. What I wanted to do is hit a handful of areas here, current events, just things that I pulled up, oftentimes just to kind of remind us of certain legal issues, just and this one actually, other than the No Child Left Behind waiver, which we got later on, seemed to be a fairly calm week. So or calm 2 weeks. So I'm gonna give you a quick breakdown. Victoria ISD approves class size waivers. The main thing I want to point out here is that, which many of you will already know, is that in kindergarten through 4th grade, there is a 22-to-1 student to teacher ratio that has been, as part of the law. However, you can ask for a waiver, and especially a couple of years ago when schools were cutting funds, is that we had tons of waivers coming through for this 22-to-1. And you go to some districts and you'll see 30, 32 kids in a classroom, 2nd or 3rd grade classroom, which is very tough unless you have just an incredible teacher in there to be able to maintain the type of order and manage the classroom in such a way to really do well for the kids. So there is a law in place for K through 4 of a student to teacher ratio of 22-to-1. Second thing I just kind of found was kind of interesting. This came up, and it's an area that I always find interest in, is that the idea of what probably Daniel Goleman, who wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, would call emotional intelligence. I mean, to what extent is IQ the driving factor for academic achievement versus the idea of this emotional intelligence, which would include the ability to read the emotions of others, to motivate others, to read your own personal emotions, and to motivate yourself. And the key, one of the big experiments that took place long was called the marshmallow experiment, where you had students, young kids, who were put into a room and they were told that they could have the marshmallow anytime they wanted to, but if they could wait until the researcher came back, they could have 2 marshmallows. And what they determined is that the students who were able to delay gratification, no matter how they did it, whether they stood on their head, walked around the room, sang to themselves, whatever it was, if they could delay the gratification when it came to the marshmallows, that those students did much better later in life. And, I've been curious to that point, and I don't know how to do it. I'm just kind of throwing this out there as an editorial comment, is that I think that if we can learn how to, that it's something other than just who you are, that it's something other than being innate, if you can teach someone emotional intelligence in some kind of legitimate way, then I think we would probably be something that would be very good for our students to have. And I know many of you out there who probably are aware of this are saying, oh, we can teach it, we can. And that's probably true to a certain extent, but I find that many schools don't do that. We tend to focus on the academic part of everything and kind of ignore the social and emotional learning that needs to take place in schools as well. I found it interesting, Longview ISD, which is very close to my house. I live in Gladewater, and I've done some work for Longview over the past couple of years. Had a driver fired after ordering students off bus. And I drove a school bus from the time I was 18 years old. I was in Denton ISD, drove a school bus throughout my undergraduate college years. And I'll tell you, there was probably a million times where I felt like ordering students off the bus. So it's like I have some empathy for this. But the truth of the matter is that as administrators, our most important area is to take care of safety. And we want to make sure the kids are safe. And let's even look at the certification tests that you would take, whether you're doing the principal test or superintendent test, whatever you're doing down the line, is that the safety issue is considered the top priority. So if you ever have a question that indicates that something is going on in which it creates an unsafe environment in the school, that takes priority over anything else when it comes to money, when it comes to any kind of meetings, when it comes to taking action on something. You've got to do what you can to make sure the kids are safe. And speaking of safety, it's one of the biggest areas, and it concerns me. I have an 18-year-old daughter. I have a 12-year-old daughter. And texting is nuts. I think it's crazy, even to the extent how many texts are sent every day as far as taking away from life. But when it comes to texting and driving, it is, they talk about here in this article that texting is an activity that kills more teenagers than drinking and driving. And so texting is a horrible thing. You see it way too often where someone gets hurt, kills themselves, kills others because they're sitting there trying to text while they're going through there, and it's just very difficult to do. And it's a concern that all of us have. I don't have the answers here either. Just pointing out a social issue that I have concerns about, and I bet many of you guys do. And as administrators, it's one of those areas that we can train all we want to. We can talk about it. We can have assemblies that discuss the dangers of it all. But many of our students will continue to do it. So we need to, to what extent we can, if we can find better ways of getting rid of it, that's going to be one of the big challenges that are going to occur, not only within schools, but within everything over time. And then when it comes to No Child Left Behind, we did get a waiver this past time. Kind of an interesting area is that if we didn't get a waiver, is that 90% of our schools would not have met the requirements of No Child Left Behind, and that's going to go up. Is that when it comes to No Child Left Behind, it's a losing proposition. I see a lot of people here and there that want to discuss how we're weakening our accountability system, and I just don't buy it. I mean, when No Child Left Behind came out and they were going to try to incrementally make things more difficult until you had all students passing everything and taking everything, it was clear from the start that this was eventually going to be a losing proposition. And it has gotten to that case. Texas is the 42nd state to be granted a waiver. It was not an unconditional waiver. There is some parts of it, kind of made a couple of notes here and related to taking care of teacher and principal evaluation. So we'll probably have a new evaluation system coming up for both teachers and principals before too long. Address gaps in student learning and graduation requirements. And other things it did is that although it takes care of the 90% plus of schools that would not have met it, the bottom 15% of schools in regard to scoring on the STAR test are going to be considered priority schools to try to get them up. And so they're still going to have a designation in place. And kind of an important area is that in the past is that you had to designate 20% of your Title I funds to go toward supplemental educational services. And this was a big business. A lot of people made, I think there were billions of dollars spent nationwide. And I can't remember, I recently saw something, I can't remember how much it was, but hundreds of millions of dollars were spent in Texas from outside companies coming in and providing these supplemental education services to students. And it was questionable whether they helped. And what it did is it took away from the ability of schools to be able to do things and embed it within the school day to try to help with extra aids and different things like that. And so that's going to be a big area right there, is that they do no longer have to designate 20% of the title funds for supplemental educational services. All right, well, take the quiz. Kind of give you some quizzes on there, is that I'm probably going to ask on the quiz what the number one priority of administrators will be. And we talked about the number one priority when it came to letting kids off school bus and having to fire the bus driver, and that certainly is safety. I may make a question real quick about the importance of emotional intelligence in kids, talk about the class size requirements for K through 4, and probably ask a couple of questions that come from the No Child Left Behind waiver.